Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the Assembly Committee on Education to order. Will the Secretary please call roll?
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Flores.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner.
Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Bilberry Axelrod.
Here. Thank you. And please note for the record, we do have a quorum. Welcome to those viewing this meeting online or on our YouTube channel, and to those of you participating in these hearings by phone or video. Before we begin, I'd like to make a few housekeeping notes. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you mute your microphone when you're not speaking so it minimizes background noise. Committee members, please keep your cameras on for the duration of the meeting so we can ensure that a quorum is present. We do expect courtesy and respect in this committee. We don't always agree on policy, but we need to be respectful to each other in the legislative process. Reminder to folks that our meeting materials can be accessed on the committee's webpage in Nellis. And a reminder for those watching online in this virtual world, we do have several screens going on at once. So if you see members looking away, they're looking at materials for the committee on one of their many devices. So remarks for our hearing. We have 2 bill hearings this afternoon. I have allocated equal time for testimony and support, opposition, and neutral. To be specific, each person providing testimony will be allowed a maximum of 2 minutes. Staff will time each speaker to ensure everyone is given an equal opportunity to speak. Speakers are urged to avoid repetition of comments made by previous speakers. We love ditto, or the person just said exactly what I wanted to say. We will limit the overall length of each testimony to 30 minutes. If you wish to testify and have not done so already, please register online through the link provided on the agenda for the meeting. Upon successful registration, you'll receive the telephone number, meeting ID, and instructions for joining the meeting. So we have an accurate record and count. We ask that you do not share this information, but instead encourage others to also register online to participate. If you do not want to testify, you may still register your opinion on a particular bill through our website. You may also submit public comment in writing, either in addition or in lieu of testifying. The chair or members of the committee may request testifiers to submit documentation supporting their testimony. So we are going to go out of order. We're going to hear SB 83 first. So I'm going to open the hearing for SB 83. The bill revises provisions relating to certain assessments. And Senator Dennis, thank you for joining us, and please begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Mo Dennis, representing Senate District 2 in Clark County. I am presenting Senate Bill 83, which revises provisions relating to certain assessments. The bill before you today comes as a recommendation from the Interim Legislative Committee on Education, LCE, that I had the pleasure to serve as Vice Chair of the LCE alongside with several colleagues on this committee, including Assemblywoman Miller, who served as the chair, Assemblywoman Gorlow, and Assemblywoman Tolles. It's nice to see everybody, even though we're still virtual, but I would like to first begin with some brief background information that explains what led to this recommendation. Due to the shifts to the remote learning resulted from the coronavirus disease of 2019 pandemic, on March 20th, 2020, the United States Department of Education announced it would allow states to submit a waiver from federally mandated testing and other requirements for the school year 2019-2020. On the same day, Nevada's Department of Education announced it had submitted the waiver request to the US DOE, and it was later approved. In September 2020, the US Secretary of Education indicated no additional waivers would be granted to states for 2020-2021. Until yesterday, the current administration had not yet given additional guidance on this matter. On February 22nd, 2021, the US Department of Education provided guidance to the states, maintaining that while the agency will not be waiving federally mandated exams this year, the US DOE is offering flexibilities in administering those tests and the use of testing results. The federal agency emphasized the need to administer assessments as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic to support the use of data as a source of information for parents, educators, and the public to target resources and support rather than for accountability purposes. Due to some schools and districts not being able to safely administer statewide summative assessments this spring, using standard practices, and other schools and districts wishing to prioritize learning time, the US DOE further noted its support for flexibilities in this regard. According to guidance provided by the state education leaders, the flexibilities afforded the states include a waiver from certain federal accountability and school identification requirements for SY 2020-2021, while maintaining the state and local report card requirements, including certain requirements to disaggregate data by student subgroups, and the administration of assessments by considering flexibilities in 1, a shortened version of the statewide assessment, 2, offering remote participation, and or 3, extending the testing window, which could include offering multiple test windows and or extending the testing window into this summer or the fall, which would be SY 2021-22. So with that background in mind, because my testimony just changed overnight because of the Fed, I will now explain what SB 83 does. SB 83 authorizes NDE to temporarily waive or pause the requirements to administer certain federally required examinations that measure the achievement and proficiency of students if the US DOE allows for such a waiver or pause. If such a waiver is allowed, Section 1 of the bill also authorized NDE to temporarily waive or pause certain reporting requirements based on assessment results measuring student achievement and proficiency. The bill also makes conforming changes to other statutes related to the temporary waiver or pause to administer such assessments. While we know the US DOE has indicated it will not provide for blanket waivers from assessments this school year, as was done last year, there are still a couple reasons why this bill is needed. 1, the legislation would allow the opportunity to provide such waivers should a similar need arise in the future. And 2, the bill would give the state the ability to provide for the waivers if the US DOE changes its guidance on this matter for this school year. Madam Chair and members of the committee, this concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Also have Dr. Jonathan Moore, Deputy Superintendent at NDE, which is also on the line to help answer any questions.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. And you read my mind, because I was going to mention to committee members that we do have Dr. Moore. And I believe that Dr. Moore might want to get on the record some issues that we are anticipating with the federal guidelines. So Dr. Moore, I'm going to turn the floor over to you if you want to put anything on the record in regards to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senator Dennis, Dr. Jonathan Moore for the record. Just to reiterate what Senator Dennis shared during his testimony, the United States Department of Education did issue guidance on yesterday regarding the accountability and school identification and the state's ability to apply for a waiver in that area. They also did note guidance regarding the administration of assessments. That states should continue to plan for administration with certain flexibilities in mind.
Thank you so much. And I also would ask at this time if our legal counsel would chime in. I think there's some confusions with regards to the annual report of accountability section in relation to the federal guidelines. So Amanda, could you take that if That's okay.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Amanda Marinta, Committee Counsel. So just to clarify, Section 1 of AB 38, I believe, or SC 83, I'm sorry, I got those mixed up. So Section 1 authorizes the Department of Education to temporarily waive or pause the requirement to administer examinations, and if those examinations are waived or paused, they don't have to report that information in their report of accountability, but the report of accountability still needs to be submitted, just not the information related to the assessments if that requirement is waived.
Okay, so if the NDA wants the bill to also conform with the reporting requirements under state law, do we need to have an amendment on this bill?
So if NDE would like this bill to also apply to a waiver from the federal requirements relating to the requirements of federal law that don't relate to the assessments and the examinations, then that would be amended.
Okay. So so if we wanted, so if we wanted this to the testing requirements as well, then we can amend it. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And with that, I'll open it up to other committee members for questions. Do we have any? I'm gonna open the gallery view because that's the easiest way for me to see. I see 1, 2. So I see Assemblywoman Hanson and I see Assemblywoman Torres. Is that all I have for right now? Okay, we'll start with you, Assemblywoman Hanson. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Dennis. It's good to see you. A question. So what we just went over in Section 1, it would authorize NDE to waive or pause, but not have to report the information. So we will have the information, but they don't have to report the information to the feds. But if we wanted access to that information, say as state officials, would we have access to that?
I am not exactly sure on that. Dr. Moore, I don't know if you can you provide any insight into that?
Thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Dr. Jonathan Moore for the record. So according to the guidance released by the federal government, the waiver that has yet to been released would allow for states to not implement or report the results of its accountability system.
Okay. I don't think I have anything else at this point, but I might have more later. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll move on to Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Senator and Dr. Moore. I really do appreciate it. And my question is just regards to like the star rating for schools. Will they be impacted by this, or is this permissive language? Is the language in this bill permissive enough so that they will not necessarily be impacted by the scores that they receive on those assessments?
This Senator Dennis, this does not impact to my understanding, the bill doesn't address that issue at all as far as the star rating system. But Dr. Moore can confirm that.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Assemblywoman, thank you for the question. Dr. Jonathan Moore for the record, that is correct. It would be the department's intention to freeze star ratings as we have from the 2018-2019 school year.
A clarification question, if I may.
Sure.
So currently the NDE already has the capacity and the ability to do that, to freeze that, and this bill just allows for them to continue, that isn't going to touch that, but they'll be able to if the superintendent and their office deems it necessary for this year.
So under the guidance, thank you, Assemblywoman, for the question. Dr. Jonathan Moore for the record. Under the most recent guidance from the United States Department of Education, each state that were to receive the accountability and school identification waiver would be required to support all of the previously identified schools, in our case, from the 2018-2019 school year. So yes, the waiver allows for that.
Thank you for that. And I'm just going to go back to Assemblywoman Hanson's question, and if I could have legal jump in on that. My understanding was that we would have that information available to us, even though it's not being reported to the feds, but we would have it for our own internal information as a state. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amanda Morrissey, Committee Counsel. That is in part correct. The federal waiver, I believe, only applies to what's reported to the government. We still collect that information. Subsection 2 of Section 1 specifically authorizes the department, if a waiver is in place from the federal government relating to the assessment, to not include the assessment examination information in the report, because those examinations wouldn't have been administered, so they wouldn't have that information to include.
Thank you for that clarification. Do I have any other questions from the committee? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to hear testimony in support, opposition, and neutral of SB 83. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your testimony as close to 2 minutes as possible. We will begin with testimony in support of SB 83. Staff from Broadcast and Production Services, please add the first caller.
To testify in support on SB 83, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 577, please slowly speak and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chris Daly, D-A-L-Y, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. In our history, there have been few more challenging times than the one we find ourselves in right now. That is why NSEA wholeheartedly supported SB 83 as introduced. In light of yesterday's guidance issued by the U.S. Department of Education, we believe NDE should exercise the limited flexibility offered to suspend high-stakes school rankings, extend timelines, and shorten testing time. We further believe SB 83 should be amended to ask the U.S. Department of Education to reconsider their decision yesterday not to offer waivers from the testing requirements this school year. High-stakes standardized tests administered during the global health crisis should not determine a student's future, evaluate educators, or punish schools, nor should they come at the expense of precious learning time that students could be spending with their educators. Over-testing has been a long-standing concern of classroom educators, as decades of standardized tests have shifted the focus in education away from student learning toward a culture of high-stakes testing. Over the last 2 sessions, NSEA worked with these committees in the legislature to reduce the burden of standardized testing on our students and educators. This included helping to pass a 2017 bill from former Senator Woodhouse to audit and streamline the amount of time and resources spent on state tests. While small changes have been made over the last several years, the current crisis calls for more substantive overall state testing requirements. We have consistently expressed our concern that existing policy on student assessments, teacher evaluations, and school star ratings compromise the safe operation of schools during the COVID-19 crisis. These mechanisms have failed to foster the improvements in either achievement or student engagement they are intended to deliver. With the continued reliance on these old schemes, students and educators have counter incentives to come to school when sick, to teach the test instead of teaching and reinforcing health and safety, and to maximize numbers and time in classrooms, even when that may be outside of health and safety guidelines. Further, drastic improvement in testing results during the most difficult school year, like the math reading results in early grades this past year, highlight just how ridiculous it is to conduct these tests during the pandemic. This school year, educators across the state have responded in a diversity of ways, depending on their district and the status of the health crisis in their communities. With districts tailoring their response to meet the unique challenges they face in their own communities, the state's one-size-fits-all approach to standardized tests misses the mark of this moment. Suspension of elaborate sorting and rating mechanisms, including federal, state, and district mandated assessments, is the smart thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly, for your testimony. Next caller in support.
Caller with the last 3 digits, 927. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Committee and Chairwoman Bilberry Axelrod. My name is Hava, H-A-W-A-H, Ahmad, A-H-M-A-D, and I am here representing the Clark County Education Association. The Clark County Education Association represents more than 18,000 licensed professionals in the Clark County School District. We are the largest independent teachers union in the country and in the state of Nevada. We engage in bipartisan advocacy for advancing public education in Nevada. Students across Nevada have experienced distance education for nearly a full year, and many of these students have experienced inconsistent engagement in learning. Nevada must be responsive to the needs of Nevada students to minimize the impact of educational inequities that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. A pause or waiver of standardized testing in accordance with federal guidelines may help our educators put students' skill development at the forefront of their education to ensure that every student has an opportunity to enter the workforce or to continue their education. Additionally, with the ability to waive or pause certain examinations and assessments, the State Department of Education can help educators prioritize the needs of their students without being bound to measurements of achievement and proficiency as prescribed by pre-pandemic times. CCEA supports the work of this committee moving forward with legislation responsive to the pandemic and are remnant supporters of ensuring that we do everything in our power to ensure students are given opportunities to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the call. Next caller in support.
To testify in support on SB 83, please press star 9 now to take your place in queue. Caller with the last 3 digits, 692. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And for the record, my name is Mary Przinski, MaryPierczynski, representing Nevada Association of School Superintendents, an organization composed of all 17 superintendents. And we realize that there have been some changes by the U.S. Department of Education yesterday, but we are in support of this bill. We supported it in front of the Senate, and we're still in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any other callers in support?
Chair, at this time, the line is open and working, but there are no other callers in the queue for support on SB 83.
Thank you very much. So we will close support and we'll move on to the testimony in opposition of SB 83.
To testify in opposition on SB 83, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. To testify in opposition on SB 83, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, at this time, the line is open and working, but we have no callers in the queue for opposition on SB 83.
Okay, thank you. We will close the testimony opposition and open it up to neutral. Is there anyone wishing to testify who is neutral on this bill?
To testify in neutral on SB 83, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. To testify in neutral on SB 83, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, at this time, the line is open and working, but there are no callers in neutral on SB 83.
Thank you very much. Okay. Senator Dennis, did you have any closing remarks for SB 83?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as I mentioned, because the initial need for this came because of the pandemic that we're in today. But by putting this in law, this will allow for us to be able to respond in the future should we ever have this need again. So that's why we're moving forward. So thank you for the opportunity to come before you and present the bill. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. So with that, I will close the hearing on SB 83. And now I'm going to open the hearing for Assembly Bill 68. This bill makes various changes relating to charter schools. On the line, we have Ms. Fiden, and you can begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Chair Bilbray Axelrod. Good afternoon, and for the record, Rebecca Fiden, Executive Director of the State Public Charter School Authority. I also have with me Ryan Herrick, our General Counsel, and Tambray Tondrick, who is the Executive Director of Beacon Academy, which is one of our sponsored schools. You'll hear from Ms. Tondrick briefly at the end of our presentation. For this hearing, we've provided you with a brief one-page overview of this bill, and my presentation will follow the outline of that one-page document. Assembly Bill 68 does three main things. First, it adjusts the timeline for action on new charter school applications. Existing statute requires the State Public Charter School Authority to consider an application for a new charter school within 60 days of receipt of the application or on another mutually agreeable timeline. The review process for a new charter school application includes evaluation against the SPCSA's application rubric, a capacity interview, and soliciting input from the local school district. Section 1 of Assembly Bill 68 proposes extending that timeline for action on new school applications from 60 to 120 days. This will ensure sufficient time for a robust review, including input from our local school districts. The second change proposed in Assembly Bill 68 is clarifying the provisions for termination and closure of charter schools. While the State Public Charter School Authority does not close schools very frequently, it is a critical accountability tool for persistent underperformance. And when we do close a school, it is important that we are intentional and thoughtful because school closure has a substantial impact on students, families, teachers, and communities. As you're aware, charter schools are subject to a performance contract, and statute includes two contract termination provisions. One of the provisions is mandatory, in which the sponsor, such as the State Public Charter School Authority, has no discretion. The other is permissive and outlines circumstances where the sponsor may terminate a charter contract and close a school. This bill, specifically sections 4 and 5, propose that both termination statutes are able to be applied to a specific campus or grade levels if there are variations in performance. To be clear, when we say grade levels, we typically mean the elementary, middle, or high school portion of a school. As you know, some charter school contracts cover multiple campuses, such as the Pinecrest or Matter schools in Southern Nevada. And in some charter contracts cover an entire K-12 program, elementary, middle, and high school. This change would allow the sponsor to target the closure to a campus or grade span of a school, again, the elementary, middle, or high school portion, that is persistently underperforming, rather than be bound to act on either all or none of the campuses or grade spans under that charter contract. To be clear, this would not require the sponsor to parse out those grade spans or campuses when considering termination, but would rather allow that discretion if there is variation in performance. For example, if a charter contract covered 5 campuses and one was persistently underperforming despite repeated efforts to improve, while the others were high performing, the sponsor could close that one campus that was struggling rather than close all 5. The last concept in Assembly Bill 68 relates to schools approved to be rated on the Alternative Performance Framework, or APF. Before I get into the specific changes proposed in this legislation, I'll provide some brief context on APF schools. As you know, all schools in Nevada must be rated on the Nevada School Performance Framework and otherwise be given a star rating. However, a school may also apply for approval by the State Board of Education to be rated on the APF. And these schools typically fall into one of 4 categories: schools offering credit recovery programs, behavioral programs, juvenile detention facilities, or special education schools serving students with identified disabilities. More specifically, in order to qualify to be rated under the APF, at least 75% of students have to meet one or more of the following criteria: having been expelled or suspended from a public school, having been deemed habitual disciplinary problem, are academically disadvantaged, which is defined as 2 years behind in grades K through 8, or more than a year behind in terms of credits to matriculate in high school, be under court supervision, or have an individualized education program. There are currently 30 schools approved by the State Board of Education to be rated on the APF, and most of them are district schools. However, there are 3 charter schools currently rated on the APF, and one is an SPCSA-sponsored charter school, Beacon Academy. The other two are district-sponsored charters. Returning now to Assembly Bill 68, Sections 2, 3, and 4 seek to recognize the noticeable difference between a typical school and an APF school within Chapter 388A. As I mentioned earlier, there are two contract termination statutes, one mandatory and one permissive. The mandatory statute requires the sponsor to terminate a contract for a school that earns 3 one-star ratings within a 5-year period. For any typical school, this makes sense. However, for an alternative performance framework school, particularly one like Beacon that serves severely credit deficient students, a 1-star rating may not tell the whole story. In fact, that is why they're on the alternative performance framework, to be able to be rated with additional indicators that shed light on other measures of performance. So Assembly Bill 68 proposes to exempt APF schools from the mandatory termination statute. To be clear, a sponsor could still close a APF school through the permissive termination statutes that these schools would continue to be subject to. The final change proposed in related to APF schools has to do with the contract amendments. A charter can request a contract amendment for a variety of reasons. For example, to increase enrollment, change locations, or add a campus. Existing statute requires the sponsor to deny certain amendment requests due to poor performance. AB 68 would exempt APF schools from the required denial of the amendment request. To be clear, our board still has discretion on amendments and can still deny these requests. This change would simply exempt these schools from the requirement to deny those certain amendment requests. Ultimately, both of these provisions related to APF schools would allow a sponsor to honor the alternative performance framework data and not rely solely on the star rating for those schools that are approved by the State Board of Education to be rated on the APF. That covers the contents of this bill. To provide a bit of insight into what an APF charter school looks like, we've asked Tambray Tondrick, the Executive Director of Beacon Academy, to provide a brief overview of her school, and I believe she is on the line and prepared to speak.
Thank you, Rebecca. Good afternoon, Chair Bilbray, Axelrod, members of the Education Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am Tambray Tondrick, Executive Director of Operations for Beacon Academy of Nevada, the only state public charter alternative education high school. Beacon Academy is dedicated to serving students who are 16 years of age or older and meet one or more of the alternative education enrollment criteria found in NRS 385A 740. This year, 98.4% of the students enrolled with Beacon are alternative education students. 78.3% of these students are credit deficient. 12.8% are adjudicated, expelled, or suspended. 25.6% are special education students, and 16.7% qualify under multiple conditions. The severity and at-risk nature of the student population requires a highly personalized, innovative program designed for older high school students. 84.1% of our students are in the 12th grade, which does include cohorts 2019, 20, and 2021. And so we have a few that are still finishing from cohort 2018. Beacon enrolls students through the age of 21 for general education, and if they're a special education student, they can remain enrolled till the age of 22. Because most alternative education students have not experienced success in school, they have a general mistrust of school staff and administration. With time and effort, the Beacon staff is able to change these negative perceptions, attitudes, and beliefs about public schools. The mind shift occurs through efforts of the school social workers, counselors, administration, teachers, and support staff. The new students are made to feel welcome and encouraged to leave their academic history at the door. We try to give them a fresh start, a do-over. We recognize where they come from and help them overcome their challenges and barriers to help students realize their goals. Our staff is very specialized. They truly care about this special population and work hard to build trusting relationships. Every student is supported by a school social worker and a teacher and provided an academic schedule individualized for them. Our innovative blended learning program places equal emphasis on the social, emotional, and academic needs of our students and provides numerous mission-specific programs and incentives and interventions. We have a very low student-to-teacher ratio. We work with our students to set short and long-term goals because it's very difficult to keep this overage student engaged in high school. So working with them short term, you're going to earn 2 credits this term, working towards that long-term goal of graduation. Real-time grade report trackers. So we look at the grades daily so that we know which students are falling behind and help them in those classes. And we have several RTI facilitators, response to intervention. We have math, literacy, and science. I'm pleased to report that we've had 27 students graduate so far this year, 5 of them from cohort 2018, 10 from cohort 2019, 7 from 2020, and 5 from 2021. 18 of 27 graduates enrolled with Beacon in their 4th or 5th year of high school. The proposed changes to Assembly Bill 68 are important for our school since we are rated under the Alternative Performance Framework, which is designed for schools just like Beacon. We serve a very highly at-risk student population. The APF measures, they use different measures such as academic progress towards graduation. They look at a 5-year cohort graduation rate and student retention rates and transition. Thank you for listening. Do you have any questions for me?
Thank you very much. We will open it up for questions, so stand by. And I'm just going to remind you, if you are called on for a question, if you could state your name for the record, it just helps with our committee secretaries who have to keep an accurate record. It's not something that we normally are used to doing, so if I remind you, it's okay, but just something to keep in mind. So I know I have one question from Vice Chair Miller. By show of hands, is there any other questions? I've got Assemblywoman Tolles. Is that it? Okay, so we'll start with Vice Chair and we'll move to Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you, Chair. My question on the bill is in regards to Section 4, Item 6. It states that if the sponsor of a charter school determines that not all of the grade levels in or campuses of the charter school meet the criteria based in subsection 1, and the charter school can remain financially viable if the charter school continues to operate and serve only the grade levels or campuses which do not meet the criteria, the sponsor may amend the charter contract to eliminate the grade levels or campuses. Director Fiden did explain that it would be to the option to close whole campuses, or I should say a campus, if there were 5 schools and one was underperforming according to the criteria here. But I have concerns over the ability to pick and choose certain grade levels to close within a school. Closing a school is one thing. If one whole school is underperforming, at least I think it says 3 times out of a 5-year period of a rating of 1, then we know there could be some systemic issues. But within the same building or community, it's much more fluid. So if one grade level is underperforming, there's a lot of strategies that can be employed to bring them up. And what's concerning to me is this bill doesn't say anything about if the certain grade levels are underperforming, strategies that will be employed or goals that will be set. It's based solely on, will the school be financially better off if we eliminate these grades? And the concern with that also is that it opens this slippery door to where then management companies and such could make these same determinations, maybe not just on performance, but on enrollment. So if we don't have enough 11th or 12th graders enrolled, we don't have enough first graders enrolled, wouldn't it just be more financially viable, as the bill says, to just eliminate those grades? And so I guess my first question is, how will we, if the bill's passed as written, how will we guarantee that those types of those types of decisions aren't made? And also, why is it made just based on what's financially viable for the charter school?
Rebecca Feiden, for the record, Executive Director of the State Public Charter School Authority. Thank you, Vice Chair Miller, for the question. So first, I'll just point back to section 4.1, which talks about 3 out of 5 star ratings. And as you all are familiar, star ratings are done on the elementary, middle, and high school level. So, you know, while it says grade levels, I want to be clear that we use that language because that was already in the following section, NRS 388A330. So we borrowed that language that had already been embedded there. But again, if we're talking about a star rating, and I'll point to the language again in 4.6 that says that not all of the grade levels or campuses meet the criteria. Well, an elementary is going to meet or not meet the criteria because of the star rating. A middle school will meet or not meet because of the star rating. So again, the use of grade levels is just because there's not typically terminology for like elementary, middle, high, although we could certainly work to clarify that if it would be helpful. To your other question around the language on financial viability, to be clear, this is action that the sponsor can take. The school cannot take this action. The sponsor can take this action. And it is only an action that could be taken as an alternative to fully terminating a charter contract. So the reason financial viability is brought into play is because, you know, one of the things that we have to look at in addition to academic performance is compliance and financial viability. So when we are considering, you know, okay, we've got an elementary, middle, and high. The elementary and middle are not working, but the high school is. Let's keep the high school. We'd have to be sure that that high school by itself could be financially viable before deeming this to be a meaningful pathway forward. The last thing we want to do is keep a school open to then not have a financial pathway to be successful. So I hope that gives a little context. And then the last thing I do want to just touch on is you mentioned improvement. And I do want to just be abundantly clear that closing a charter school is, while it is an important accountability tool, our goal is not to have to close any schools. Our goal is for all of our schools to be successful. And that's why we think that our accountability work is so important. That's why we spend so much time talking about academic, organizational, and financial performance with our schools. That's why we conduct site evaluations. That's why we have schools come and speak in front of our board when there is underperformance and put forth improvement plans. So there are many, many things that happen along the way to help prevent this scenario. Again, this is not something we want to do, but it is part of the deal. If a school is underperforming consistently, it is, you know, kind of that last step in the process. So Vice Chair Miller, I hope that answers your question, but certainly happy to share additional information as I can.
Follow-up, Chair?
Absolutely.
Director, it does in a sense, but I guess I'm still trying to get some clarity around the ability, as you mentioned, that the distinction between, you know, we're really talking about groupings of elementary, middle, and high school. And so that being said, we also know that within that grouping, if I'm looking at elementary school and I'm looking at the star rating for our elementary schools, I can also still extrapolate from that, oh, look, it's our 3rd grade or our 4th grade that's bringing our scores down and ultimately impacting this star rating. So at that point, I can say, well, it's, you know, 3rd grade, they're the ones that are bringing down our scores, and we still want to be able to have high scores. We don't want to risk having, you know, getting a star rating of a 1 again. So why don't we just eliminate grade 3? And then, you know what, the problem's kind of over. We'll see our scores go up, our star rating increases, and now we just don't have to deal with that grade level. So what kind of guardrails do we have in place so that that doesn't happen? Because otherwise it just seems like, you know, let's just eliminate the grade or grades because they're underperforming. And it also kind of begs to the question then, if we have grades, if we need to start cutting out grades, then is it again ultimately a systemic issue at the school?
Rebecca Fine, for the record, I just want to be abundantly clear. The intent is not to cut out a third grade or a second grade. Like, that is absolutely not the intent behind what we've put together here. So if we can clarify this, my understanding from our council is that there might be some language in 388 that speaks to types of schools, elementary, middle, high. So I'm happy to include some language that clarifies that if that would address your concern. But again, absolutely not the intent here. And it is action that the sponsor would be taking, not the school taking. So, this is part of our oversight and accountability. And then I believe you asked the second part to the question, but Chair Miller, I apologize if I forgot the second part. Would you remind me?
I think it was just to, again, those guardrails. Oh, no, I'm sorry. The second part was about then the questions of if we do have to shut a grade level down in a school. And I just want to say, Director, I know that this is not the intent, but I also know that often liberties or they're not always, the unintended consequences from what's intended and from what the charter school authority would expect and condone doesn't mean that that's always what's happening on the ground. But the other question was then, if we did have to close a grade level, so then doesn't that raise other concerns about that school as a whole systemically?
Rebecca Fine, for the record, I absolutely think that that could be true. And that's why this isn't necessarily saying we have to only act with a set of grade levels or a single campus. It's permissive to give that option when there is variation. I'll give a little bit of context that might help you to understand why we think this change is important. Going back to 2015, when 300 and 330, the two sections we're talking about here, kind of came to their current form. At that point in time, charter schools, Pinecrest Academy with 5 campuses would be rated as 1 elementary school, 1 middle school, 1 high school, right? Even though they have 5 campuses, they'd only receive 1 elementary, 1 middle, 1 high school rating. So fast forward to 2017, 2018, the department decides to go ahead and rate each campus separately, which we think is absolutely the right thing to do. We want that level of detail and understanding. But what we see, and again, this hasn't happened yet, but we see the potential for there to be a mismatch between the language that talks about an entire charter contract and kind of assumes a single star rating under a contract. And then the reality that we might have 5 campuses and 10 ratings, and all of a sudden we've got a couple of 1s here and a couple of 4s here, and now we've got this mismatch that we're dealing with. And so I hope that helps you to understand where the impetus for this came from. And again, our intent is certainly not to we are absolutely think accountability is a critical part of our role, but what we don't want to do is close a 1-star school and at the same time have to close a 4 or 5-star school. That's probably a disservice to the community, or vice versa, keep a 1-star school open because it's got a 4 or 5-star school connected to it. Again, an equal potential disservice. And so we haven't been in that position, but we foresee a mismatch between what's happening in terms of those star ratings and then how the statutes are constructed. So again, Vice Chair Miller, I hope you recognize there very likely is a systemic issue, but our intent is not to try to get around the accountability responsibility, but to make sure that the statutes line up with how the star ratings and the system that we're based on is constructed. So again, happy to answer any follow-up questions there as well.
Thank you for that, Director. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to take a moment to say that we will continue to talk offline. There might be an opportunity here for an amendment to just clarify some of that language so the intent is clear as we move on to sessions that perhaps all of us won't be around for and won't remember this conversation. So I think that would be a good thing. Assemblywoman Tolles, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. My computer was having a hard time finding the mouse. So thank you so much for that. And I do appreciate all the discussion and some of those clarifications on the record. And first, let me just say how much I appreciate. I know this body passed legislation to increase accountability and transparency last session. And in spite of the pandemic, I just want to commend your work on still holding those site visits. It was a pretty high bar to meet, and you still met it even in the pandemic when you had to do it virtually. So thank you for really taking on that task of doing every single one of those site evaluations so that this body could have the benefit of that transparency. I just want to make sure that I heard you clearly that there is still discretion here. This is not automatic. This is just giving you the discretion on a case-by-case basis, not making it a requirement that it has to be mandated, that it's closed, and that you could also revisit that the next year as well if it's still a one-star school. Is that correct?
Rebecca Fiden for the record. So there are two existing statutes related to closure and termination, one that's mandatory and one that's permissive. And both right now speak largely to the contract as a whole, although there is some grade level language included in the permissive one. And so what this would do is add permissive language for us to, instead of terminate, to amend that contract to eliminate grade levels or campuses. So, end result, the statutes currently say close the entire, everything under the contract. The end result of this legislation would be that we could target that closure to where the issue lies, rather than be bound to trying to address the issue across the entire, everything covered by the contract. Does that answer your question, Assemblywoman Toles?
Yes, that does help. And you mentioned one school in particular, maybe two. If this bill had been in place, let's say passed in the last legislative session, how many grades do you feel like, and how many students would this have had an impact on?
Rebecca Fiden for the record. We have actually seen tremendous improvement in this performance of our schools. We currently only have 2 schools rated as 1 star. And again, we have a lot of ratings. So we have about 100 star ratings across all of our schools. And so we don't see necessarily a significant number of schools that would have been impacted. We have taken some accountability actions with a couple of schools that have resulted through litigation in certain segments, elementary, middle, or high closing. However, we don't anticipate, we don't see that we have had a strong need for closure that has not been met. Rather, we foresee there could be some mismatch down the road between the now star rating by campus and level versus the language in the contract or in the statutes.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair, for the indulgence of time.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Looking, I don't see any hands going up. Okay, with that, we will move on to testimony and support, opposition, and neutral, or AB 68. Remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your testimony as close as you can to 2 minutes. We will begin with testimony in support of AB 68. Staff and from Broadcast Production Services, please add the first caller.
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on AB 68, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 498, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Erica Valdrez, ERICAVALDRIZ with the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is in support of AB 68. The Chamber supports diverse educational opportunity for the students, such as charter schools in Nevada. We believe this bill continually supports student achievement and the well-being of our students. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee for your time. We urge your support for this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Valdrez. Next caller in support.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 244, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Victor Salcido. SALCIDO, and I'm here with the Charter School Association of Nevada. We represent public charter schools throughout the state, both district-sponsored and state-sponsored through the Charter Authority. We simply wanted to express our support for AB 68 as written. We believe the proposed changes make sense and reflect the reality on the ground where you have a single charter contract that at times serves multiple campuses and where star ratings are assigned on the basis of the elementary, middle, and high school classifications. This simply will make it easier to reflect any accountability measures to that reality, and we are in support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salzito. Any other callers in support?
Caller with the last three digits, 030. Please press star 6 to unmute. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You all have 2 minutes and may begin.
Madam Chair, Brad Keating for the record, representing the Clark County School District, BRADKEATING. Just wanted to call in support of Assembly Bill 68. As you all know, we have a number of charter schools under the purview of the Clark County School District, and we appreciate the work and the support of the State Public Charter School Authority and working closely with our charter school team at the school district to help us ensure that we're evaluating our charter schools correctly, and also allowing us some flexibility in being able to work with these schools to make sure that all of our schools are promoting student achievement and doing the best they can. So we are in support of AB 68 and want to specifically thank Rebecca Fiden and Ryan Herrick. It has been a pleasure to work with them over the last 2 years in their role at the State Public Charter School Authority, and we look forward to doing so in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Keating. Any other calls in support?
To testify in support on AB 68, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, at this time, the line is open and working, but there are no other callers in support.
Thank you very much. And at that point, we will close the testimony in support and move on to opposition. Please open the line for opposition.
To testify in opposition on AB 68, please press star 9 now to take your place in queue. Caller with the last three digits of 120, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Stephen Cohen for the record. Stephen with a V. Cohen as in the Assemblywoman, but no known relation that we're familiar with. Real quick, the one big problem I have, having deferred moving here by 20 years because of CCSD, is the exception language, specifically for special education students, a bucket that is growing as a result of COVID. I think that it kind of allows potentially non-traditional schools to get around federal laws such as IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, but I am happy to work with stakeholders on a middle point. And with that, Madam Chair, thank you, and I yield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cohn. Any other callers in opposition?
Caller with the last three digits of 577, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chris Daly, DALY, Nevada State Education Association, the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. NSEA opposes AB 68, which moves in the wrong direction to enact accountability measures for underperforming charter schools. During last session, NSEA pushed for greater accountability for charters. While our proposal to cap expansion was not successful, the legislature did pass a 5-year growth management plan for charters. Interestingly enough, during that same year, this growth management plan, the Charter School Authority approved nearly 5,000 new charter slots. across the state. While there have been some improvements to charter accountability since last session, including actually conducting site visits, let's be honest with each other. The Charter School Authority is only now clearing a relatively low bar of accountability. While it's great for the Charter Authority has begun to address baked-in biases against disadvantaged students, when looking at overall charter school populations, charter schools serve proportionally fewer at-risk students, English learners, and students with disabilities. Even with progress on more diversity and new charter seats, there's no path for charters to achieve parity in the foreseeable future. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw continued unaccountability as many charter schools gamed the system by triple dipping, taking state funds, CARES Act funds, and PPP funds, all while playing by their own set of rules. Given these concerns, NSCA opposes AB 68 as we believe language offered in Section 4.6 lessens accountability for underperforming charters. Under current statute, the sponsor of a charter school shall terminate the charter contract of a charter school if the charter school receives 3 annual ratings established as the lowest rating possible in a 5-year period. The new language would instead allow a charter school to continue to operate by only serving those grade levels not underperforming. This could allow a charter school to avoid accountability by just eliminating a single or handful of grade levels. This seems like the State Public Charter School Authority working around the current accountability standards for underperforming charter schools so they don't have to take the more difficult but necessary action of termination. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Do we have anyone else on the line for opposition?
To testify in opposition on AB 68, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the line is open and working. However, there are no more callers in the queue for opposition on AB 68.
And with that, we will close the testimony in opposition and open it up for neutral. Is there anyone on the line to testify in neutral?
To testify neutral on AB 68, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 497, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Yvonne Sweeten, YVONNESWEETEN. I am neutral on AB 68, and thank you for letting me speak my comment today.
Thank you, Ms. Sweeten. Are there any other callers in neutral?
Chair, the line is open and working. However, there are no more callers for neutral on AB 68.
Okay, then we will close the testimony in neutral. Ms. Fiden, did you have anything else that you would like to say before we close the hearing?
Thank you, Chair. No, just that we appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today and to receive all the questions, and we look forward to working with LCB on the grade level issue that was raised here today.
Thank you. I look forward to speaking with you about that. And with that, I will close the hearing on AB 68. Now we will move on to public comment. Before we go to this agenda item, I'd like to remind those present that the period for public comment is an opportunity to discuss general matters that fall within the purview of the committee. Additionally, remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your time as close to 2 minutes as possible. Staff in our broadcast and production services, please add the first caller with public comment to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. To make public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. If you wish to make public comment at this time, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. For anyone who recently joined, If you wish to make public comment, please press star 9 now. Chair, the line is open and working. However, there are no callers in queue for public comment at this time.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Members, are there any comments from our members before we adjourn? I'm looking to see anyone. All right, well, with that, we will adjourn this meeting. Our next meeting will be Thursday, February 25th at 1:30. That concludes our meeting for today. Meeting is adjourned.